her deathbed, Lucy's grandmother, Agnes, called her granddaughter close and revealed a secret she had kept all her life. Contrary to what everyone believed, Lucy's parents had never legally married. This put the legitimacy of the inheritance at risk and could spark a fierce battle among Lucy's siblings. Agnes warned Lucy that the responsibility of dealing with this revelation would fall on her shoulders and that she would have to make difficult decisions. Stunned, Lucy had no idea what to say or how to process the news. Agnes's funeral was a quiet affair, a small ceremony as she had requested, with only family and close friends present. Lucy remained silent almost the entire time. Her siblings, Thomas and Emily, seemed devastated by their grandmother's loss, but their minds were already preoccupied with something else: the inevitable division of the family's estate. Agnes had made it clear in her will that everything would go to the 3 grandchildren, but no one yet knew the implications of the secret that now weighed heavily on Lucy. That night, after the funeral, Lucy sat in Agnes's old bedroom, still in the family house. She could smell her grandmother's scent lingering in the pillows, a mix of lavender and dried flowers that had always comforted her as a child. Now, however, nothing could calm her. The revelation her grandmother had made on her deathbed echoed in her mind. "What do I do with this?" she thought, staring out the window at the yard where she and her siblings had played years ago. Her eyes filled with tears, and the weight of the secret felt unbearable. Thomas and Emily were in the living room, discussing something with the family lawyer. It was clear that Thomas wanted to secure control of their father's company. He had always been ambitious, willing to do whatever it took to maintain the power and status their family had long held. "Lucy, do you want to be involved in the decisions?" Thomas asked as she approached the door. She hesitated but knew she couldn't stay out of it. Her grandmother's secret could change everything. "Of course, I want to know what's going on," she said, trying to sound confident, though the truth felt like an anchor weighing her down. Emily, who had always been more emotional, had swollen eyes from crying so much. She could barely follow the conversation. "I just want this to be over. I can't stand thinking about money, the will, any of this," she said, collapsing onto the sofa with her hands covering her face. Lucy's heart ached. They didn't know anything. What would happen when the truth came out? She wondered if she should tell them now, in that moment. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, urging her to wait. "Find the right moment, Lucy. Don't rush it." That night, back in her own home, Lucy couldn't sleep. Insomnia gnawed at her. Her mind raced, wondering how the secret would affect everything. As the eldest, Thomas had always seen himself as the natural heir. The discovery that their parents had never legally married could invalidate his claim to the largest portion of the inheritance, setting off a true family chaos. Days passed, and tension within the family grew. The family lawyer, Peter Morris, had informed them that the process of dividing the estate would soon begin, but Lucy knew it would be far more complicated than anyone realized. She needed more time to think. She wasn't brave enough yet to reveal the secret, but she also felt she couldn't wait much longer. That afternoon, Thomas unexpectedly showed up at Lucy's house. His face carried the stern expression he wore when trying to take control of a situation. He sat down at the kitchen table, staring at her intensely. "What's going on, Lucy?" he asked abruptly. What do you mean?" she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. "You've been acting strange since Grandma died, and I'm sure there's something you're not telling us," Thomas said, direct as always, his eyes scrutinizing her with suspicion. Lucy felt the ground shake beneath her. Thomas had always been perceptive, able to tell when something was wrong. He had always been able to read people, especially her. "It's nothing. I'm just sad, like all of us," she tried to deflect, standing up to make coffee in an attempt to shift the focus of the conversation. But Thomas wasn't giving up. "Lucy, listen to me. The will is going to be read soon, and the lawyer said there shouldn't be any complications. But I know our family. Nothing is ever that simple. I feel like there's more to this," he insisted. She sighed deeply, holding the coffee cup with both hands, trying to steady her emotions. "Why do you always think I'm hiding something?" I'm not the one trying to control everything. By the way, why are you so desperate to secure Dad's company? She asked, trying to turn the attention back to him. Thomas was silent for a moment, surprised by the accusation, but then he crossed his arms defensively. Because I've spent my entire life working for it, Lucy. I sacrificed years to keep this family together. Emily's completely disconnected, and you've never shown any interest in the business. I'm just making sure Dad's legacy continues, he explained. His tone softened, but Lucy knew that his motivation wasn't just about protecting the legacy. He wanted control. That night, Lucy reflected on what she should do. If she told the truth, Thomas would be furious, and Emily would be devastated. But how could she move forward, knowing that everything they believed in was based on a lie? The following weeks turned into a real chess match. Thomas pushed harder each day for the will to be read and the inheritance divided. Emily, on the other hand, seemed increasingly detached, drowning in her grief. Lucy continued to wrestle with herself, torn between loyalty to her grandmother and the fear of tearing the family apart. Finally, the day of the will reading arrived. The lawyer, Peter Morris's office, where the reading would take place, seemed even more austere than usual that morning. The walls were lined with framed diplomas and shelves full of law books, but nothing in the room could mask the gravity of the occasion. Thomas, Lucy, and Emily sat side by side, though there was an obvious emotional distance between them. Each seemed trapped in their own thoughts. Thomas fidgeted impatiently with his phone, as if waiting for this bureaucratic process to be just another hurdle to overcome. Emily, in contrast, could barely lift her head, still lost in the pain of their grandmother's death and the family tension. Lucy observed everything, trying to mask the storm of emotions swirling inside her. This is the moment, Lucy thought. She knew that once the will was read, there would be serious consequences if she didn't reveal the secret first. But how could she destroy their parents' image at that very moment? Peter Morris entered the room carrying a worn leather folder. He looked serious but calm, like someone used to handling difficult situations. He sat down in front of the three siblings and glanced at them with a hint of compassion, as if he already sensed the storm ahead. First of all, I want to express my condolences once again, Peter began in a formal but gentle tone. I know how much Agnes meant to this family, and I understand that this is a delicate time. Lucy took a deep breath. She knew that in a matter of minutes, everything could change. Let's proceed with the will, Peter said, opening the folder and beginning to flip through the documents. Thomas adjusted in his seat, ready to claim what he believed was his. Lucy could feel his ambition and desire for control. Emily, however, seemed utterly uninterested. The money didn't matter to her, but the symbolism of the inheritance was what tied her to their parents and grandmother. Agnes left clear instructions, Peter began. The bulk of the estate will be divided among the three of you, including the house, properties, and the company. However, there is a specific clause regarding the family business, which will be inherited entirely by the eldest heir. Thomas smiled, confident. It was obvious that he would be the beneficiary. But before Peter could continue, Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. This was the moment. I can't let this happen, she thought. She looked at Thomas, then at Emily, and finally at Peter, who seemed about to proceed with the reading. Wait, Lucy interrupted, her voice louder than she had intended. Everyone in the room turned to her, surprised. Thomas frowned, confused. What is it, Lucy? He asked, his voice laced with impatience. She felt her heart race. The words she needed to say were stuck in her throat, but she knew there was no turning back. It was now or never. There's something you both need to know, she began, her voice wavering but quickly regaining strength. Grandma told me something before she died, something that changes everything. Emily lifted her eyes, surprised. Until that moment, she had seemed detached from it all, but now her interest was piqued. Thomas, on the other hand, looked skeptical. What are you talking about? He asked, with a mix of frustration and curiosity. Lucy took a deep breath and looked directly at her siblings, her eyes shining with the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. Mom and Dad, They were never legally married. The silence that followed her statement was deafening. Thomas and Emily stared at her, stunned, as if they couldn't process what they had just heard. "That's ridiculous," Thomas said, trying to dismiss the information. "Of course, they were married. We've seen the photos, heard the stories. What you're saying doesn't make sense." Lucy shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I thought the same, but Grandma said they never made it official." "Which means—" She hesitated, feeling the gravity of what she was about to say next. "That the will could be contested." Thomas stood up, clearly furious. "This is insane, Lucy. You're going to believe some story Grandma told on her deathbed. She was sick. She probably didn't know what she was saying." "She knew exactly what she was saying," Lucy replied firmly. "And that's not all, Thomas. It means you don't automatically have the right to the company. There's no legitimate eldest heir." Thomas froze for a moment, as if Lucy's words had finally pierced his armor of confidence. He looked to Peter Morris, as if expecting the lawyer to refute everything. "Is this true?" Thomas asked, his voice now weaker, as if he could already feel control slipping from his grasp. Peter closed the folder and sighed. "If your parents' marriage wasn't legally formalized, it could complicate the division of assets, particularly the company," he confirmed gravely. Thomas's face turned red with anger. "This is absurd. I've worked my whole life for this company. I'm not going to let this be taken from me over a technicality." Emily, who had been silent until now, finally spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. "I can't believe this is happening. Our family was supposed to be so solid. How could this be true?" Lucy felt the weight of guilt. She knew that revealing the secret would shatter the idealized image her siblings had of their family, but she also knew that hiding the truth would be worse in the long run. "I don't know what to do," Lucy said, looking at Emily with sadness in her eyes. "But I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Grandma asked me to tell you. I just didn't know when the right time was." Thomas, still furious, took a step toward Lucy. "You've ruined everything, Lucy. Everything. And now, what happens next? Is this going to be a war between us? Are you going to let lawyers decide the fate of our family?" Lucy recoiled, feeling the pressure of Thomas's words. "I don't know, Thomas," she responded honestly. "But I know the truth had to come out. Now it's up to us to decide how to deal with it." The silence fell over the room again. The future of their family was at stake, and everyone knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The lawyer's office felt even quieter than before, but the weight of what had been said still hung heavily in the air. Thomas remained standing, his eyes locked on Lucy, unable to hide the anger boiling inside him. Emily, on the other hand, seemed lost, still reeling from the shock of the revelation. Peter Morris looked at the three siblings, aware of the complexity of the situation. He knew this wouldn't be easy to mediate. With the will and the legality of Henry and Clara's marriage now in question, everything was up in the air. "Well, what happens from here depends on you," Peter said, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "If you want to contest the will or seek legal confirmation about your parents' marriage, that could take some time." Lucy couldn't shake the overwhelming guilt that consumed her. Even though she knew revealing the secret was the right thing to do, she had never imagined the reaction would be this intense. Thomas seemed ready for war, while Emily, she wasn't even sure how Emily truly felt. Thomas, still furious, took a few steps toward the door. He needed to get out. He felt betrayed by everyone, his grandmother, his parents, and, most of all, by Lucy. "I need some air," he said, storming out and slamming the door behind him. Lucy looked at Emily, who now seemed a bit more present. She was still shaken, but Thomas's reaction had stirred something inside her. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time, she felt that Thomas didn't have total control of the situation. "You knew this the whole time?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "No," Lucy replied honestly. "Grandma told me on her deathbed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want everything to fall apart. I just didn't know when the right moment was." Emily looked at the floor, thinking about what this meant for her. All her life, she had been the most emotional, the one who depended most on others for support. But now, in the face of this situation, she began to realize that perhaps it was time to take on a different role. "And now?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. "What do we do now, Lucy?" Lucy didn't have any immediate answers. Everything felt so uncertain. She didn't want a legal battle, nor did she want to see the family fall apart. But she knew that with Thomas in this state, things could get much worse very quickly. "Let's give Thomas some time," Lucy said, trying to stay calm. "We need to think clearly before making any decisions. Maybe we can find a solution without having to involve lawyers and courts." Emily nodded, agreeing, but there was still something bothering her. "Thomas is never going to accept this. He's always believed the company was his by right. If the papers are wrong, he's not going to give up easily." Lucy knew Emily was right. Thomas was determined to fight for what he believed was his, and with their parents' legal status now in doubt, things could get even more complicated. But above all, Lucy wanted to avoid turning the situation into a battlefield. Hours later, Lucy went to Thomas's house. She knew she had to talk to him, try to calm things down before he made any rash decisions. When she arrived, she found the door slightly ajar. As she entered, she saw Thomas sitting in the living room, holding a whiskey bottle, staring blankly ahead. "What do you want, Lucy?" he asked without even turning around. Lucy felt the weight of the tension between them. She approached slowly, sitting down across from her brother, unsure of how to begin. Thomas looked beaten, as if, for the first time in years, he had lost control of everything. "I didn't want it to be like this," she said softly. "I didn't want this to destroy our family." Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "Family? You just destroyed any notion of family we had. Do you have any idea what this means for me? I dedicated my life to the company, to the image that Mom and Dad built. And now, everything could be contested because of some ridiculous mistake." Lucy stayed silent for a few seconds, carefully choosing her words. "I know you dedicated your life to the company. No one is taking that from you. But what Grandma told me, I couldn't just ignore it. Maybe there's a way to resolve this without tearing each other apart in the process." Thomas looked at her skeptically, but the alcohol in his system had already calmed him a little. He knew Lucy wasn't his enemy, but in the moment, it was hard to see that. "And how do you suggest we do that?" he asked, finally willing to listen. Lucy took a deep breath. She knew the proposal she was about to make was risky, but she had to try. "What if we share the company's responsibilities in a way that makes everyone satisfied? You can still run things like you always wanted, but Emily and I also want a role in this. We can't just ignore what happened. But it doesn't have to be a war." Thomas remained silent, considering the idea. He knew that legally, things could get very complicated if they decided to fight it out in court. Maybe an internal solution was the best way forward. "And how do I know you and Emily won't try to overthrow me?" he asked, still suspicious. "Because that was never my intention," Lucy replied sincerely. "I just want the company to keep going, so Dad's work wasn't in vain. We're siblings, Thomas. We can't tear each other apart over this." Thomas relaxed a bit. Pride still weighed on him, but the truth was, he didn't want to see the company ripped apart by a legal dispute. "All right," he finally conceded. "Let's try to resolve this among ourselves. But I'm not giving up control." Lucy nodded, relieved that she had managed to take a step toward a peaceful resolution. She knew there was still much to discuss, but this was the beginning of reconciliation. In the following days, Lucy, Thomas, and Emily began meeting to discuss how to organize the company and the inheritance in a way that no one would be left at a disadvantage. Emily, who had initially seemed uninterested, began to show more involvement, and Thomas, though still reluctant, started to accept the idea that he would have to share control. Peter Morris was informed of the siblings' decision to try to resolve things without involving external lawyers, which pleased him. He knew that disputes like this could drag on for years, destroying not only fortunes, but entire families. Months passed since the day Lucy revealed the secret that shook the family. Life had somehow started to return to normal, though nothing was quite the same. The frequent meetings between Lucy, Thomas, and Emily to sort out the inheritance and the company had become less frequent, but the path to a peaceful resolution was clear. Each of the siblings had found their place, or at least started to accept it. Thomas, though still stubborn, had agreed to share control of the company with Lucy and Emily. He remained in charge of most of the operations, but now he was required to consult his sisters on important decisions. This bothered him at first, but over time he began to realize that sharing the burden made things easier. He still felt the sting of wounded pride, but in some ways, it made him reconsider what really mattered. Emily, who had always been the most distant from the family business, surprised everyone with her growing interest in learning about the company. She found purpose in handling the company's social and environmental issues, working on corporate responsibility programs that had never been a priority for Thomas. It was as if she had finally found something that made her feel like she was contributing to something bigger. And Lucy, who had always been the quiet mediator, also found her own voice. Since revealing her grandmother's secret, something inside her had changed. She realized she carried not only the responsibility of keeping the family peace, but also a desire to do something meaningful with her life. One morning, as she looked over the company papers spread out on her kitchen table, an idea began to take shape in her mind. She had already shared some of her thoughts with Emily, who encouraged her to pursue something more, something that would truly have an impact. Thomas, as of course, was more pragmatic. For him, the company's success was the family legacy, and any deviation from that path was a waste. But Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that the inheritance they had received could be used for something more than just maintaining the status quo. One day, she decided to talk to Thomas about her idea. "I've been thinking about something," Lucy began as the two of them sipped coffee during a break between meetings. Thomas looked at her suspiciously, as always. "Here we go again with your ideas," he teased, but there was a lightness in his tone. Their relationship had softened since they began working together. "I know this might sound a little out of what we're used to," she continued, hesitantly, "but I want to use part of the inheritance to open a shelter for women in vulnerable situations." Thomas raised his eyebrows, surprised. "A shelter?" "Yes, I've been thinking about it a lot. Grandma always talked about how the women in our family were strong, how she worked hard to build everything. But I know not all women have the same opportunities we've had. I want to do something to change that, even if it's just for a small part of them." Thomas was silent for a moment, processing what Lucy had said. His first reaction was to think about numbers, as always. A shelter meant costs, philanthropy, something he didn't see as profitable. But at the same time, he couldn't deny that there was something noble about the idea. "And how is this going to work?" he asked, not dismissively, but genuinely curious. Lucy smiled, realizing that her brother hadn't immediately rejected her idea. "I've already started researching organizations that work with this. The idea is to create a safe space where women can rebuild themselves, receive education, psychological support, and have a chance to start over. The company can help fund it, and I think if we do it right, it could also improve our image." Thomas took a deep breath, and for the first time, he seemed to see Lucy's vision in a new light. "It could be interesting," he finally said. "I'm not going to lie, Lucy. I've always thought philanthropy was a waste of money. But if this is important to you, maybe we can work on it together." Lucy felt a wave of relief. She knew Thomas was still far from being a committed philanthropist, but the fact that he was open to the idea was already a major victory. That night, Lucy told Emily about the conversation, and her sister was moved. "I always knew you would do something amazing with this inheritance," Emily said, hugging her. "Grandma would be so proud of you." Months later, the shelter was opened. Lucy named it Agnes House, in honor of her grandmother, who, despite keeping a secret that nearly tore the family apart, had taught Lucy the value of feminine strength. The shelter's opening was a success, and it wasn't long before women in vulnerable situations began finding refuge and support there. For Lucy, it marked the closing of a circle. The family inheritance, which had been the source of so much pain and conflict, was now being used to transform lives. Thomas, though still focused on the company, surprised Lucy by becoming actively involved in managing the shelter, using his expertise to ensure the project was sustainable and well-run. Emily, on the other hand, dedicated herself entirely to the company's social side, forging partnerships and projects aimed at supporting underserved communities. The family wasn't completely healed, old wounds were still mending, and the trauma of the revelation still lingered in their conversations, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. They had found a new purpose, something greater than any fortune could offer. And so, the pain that came with Agnes's secret was transformed into something stronger, something purer. What could have destroyed the family ended up uniting them in ways none of them could have foreseen. Lucy looked to the future with new eyes. The inheritance she had received wasn't just about the family's wealth. It was also the responsibility of building something that would make a difference. And in that moment, she knew she was on the right path.